Well, here we are again with the Gospel of Mark. We're on chapter 3. We're going to see about the first 19 verses or so, hopefully. And there's this healing of a man with a withered hand or paralyzed hand. Some translations have it. And again, Jesus is healing on a Sabbath. It seems like he chooses Sabbaths. The tradition has it that he's healing on Sabbaths, which has to be significant. You could say if he wanted to observe the Sabbath a certain way, he would wait till the following day to heal, rather than get into these controversies with his opponents. But I think we have to assume or suppose that he's thinking of the Sabbath as a day of rest where good things can happen and healings can take place without this Pharisaic, halakhic interpretation of the Torah that you have to be, perfectly, still or avoid so many kinds of activities. And so there's a point here being made that Jesus is contesting, especially the Pharisaic interpretation of the Torah, which is strict. We've mentioned that the Mishnah, the Jewish code of the 2nd century, from where the Talmud will evolve, talks about building a fence around the Torah, meaning stop short of even coming close to violating the Torah. It's a way of taking the Torah very seriously. But as we said before, Jesus seems to be incredibly radical. Harmut Stegemann, as I mentioned, posits the hypothesis that Jesus' healings indicate a return to the pre-fall Torah, before all the rules that are specifically pertinent to Judaism, which are specifically rules of separation, uh, are now obsolete, at least for Gentiles, at least for Christians. And so I think that these violations of the Sabbath have to be understood as a point being made that there's a new creation at work, a return to the pre-fall Torah in Genesis 1 and 2, before sin made everything topsy-turvy. We could relate this to the Son of Man in Daniel, who gets exousia, who gets dominion again, as Adam was supposed to have retained before sin took it away and gave it to the beasts, the empires, the forces of evil, even the sea, which we're going to see later on in chapter 4. And remember that we just saw in chapter 2 that the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. And we related some of the things in chapter 2, the healing of the paralytic, with John chapter 5, where Jesus is accused of making himself equal to God, because he says, my Father works up to now, and I also work. The Jews want to kill him. In other words, even though God rested on the 7th day, the Sabbath, Shabbat, he ceased in Genesis 1. There's a new creation at work after a long period of dormancy. We're going to see that also later, where God has been asleep for 400 years. There have been no prophets for 400 years since the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. John the Baptist is the reawakening of prophecy. And so I think the point being made here is that is the question Jesus asks: is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or to kill? And of course, this would tie in with things that even the Pharisees allowed to be done on Sabbath. I mean, you have to eat, you can walk a certain short distance, you can rescue your ox or whatever if it falls into a ditch, whether you use a tool or not. They said you can use a tool. The Qumranites would say you can't even use a tool. That would be work. So you get into these legal disputes that I think Jesus is not accepting. And again, with the episode of the loaves that David's men ate, uh, he's looking at it as the Sabbath, not something that prevents life-giving activity, but rather activity that either blasphemes against God's good creation or hurts your fellow human beings, as Isaiah says in when he talks about doing this, what's good in the Sabbath, etc. Keep your hand from harm, etc. And when he asks this question again, they are silent. They don't know what to say. And he looks at them with anger. This orge, which I think is probably the only time we're going to find this emotion on the part of Jesus clearly stated. Grieved at their hardness of heart, which of course is a biblical commonplace, stiff-necked, hardness of heart. Harden not your hearts, as in Meribah, as in the day of Massah in the desert, etc. And so he heals this man, and the hand was restored, which is the word I use for the paralytic in chapter 2, the restoration of the paralytic. And then, very interestingly, the Pharisees went out immediately, very marked, and this immediately keeps being used, euthus, and held counsel with the Herodians. You would think these would be strange bedfellows. I don't know that much is known about the Herodians. At least I don't remember reading much about them years ago. Maybe with recent research there is. But you would have probably the Herodians being very much in favor of Roman rule, and the Pharisees not in favor of Roman rule, but not as radical in violating Roman rule. And so here you have something that is related to an episode in 12:13 of Mark, where again the Pharisees and the Herodians ask Jesus about tribute to Caesar. So there you have the Pharisees say, we really shouldn't have to pay tax to Caesar, but we do it as good citizens. The Zealots would have said, no, don't even pay it. And of course, the Herodians would probably say, sure, pay it. Why not? I mean, they were in cahoots politically. But here, so you have this alliance here that is, again, in Mark anyway, being paralleled with the final debate, question, traps laid against Jesus in just before his arrest and passion. Again, Pharisees and Herodians are mentioned. And this was right after the Temple Act in chapter 12 of Mark. And then you have another sort of summary in Mark 3:7, where he goes to the region of Galilee, Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea. Let me bring that up on the screen. He withdrew with his disciples. So there you have again, a withdrawal of Jesus when people are trying to kill him. This is going to be, I think in the last days, he's going to be hiding in the Mount of Olives. And that's where you have a Judas have to come in and say, I know where he spends the night. You can arrest him quietly without the people, getting upset about this prophet, etc., getting arrested. And so they mention all this area of Idumea, which would be more in the south, and from beyond the Jordan, and then Tyre and Sidon in the north. A great crowd heard all he was doing. They came to him. This is a good summary of the fame of Jesus. And he gets a boat ready because of the crowd, lest they crush him. And he healed many, so that all who had diseases pressed around him to touch him. And whenever the unclean spirits, so he heals a lot of people, and he was known for that. And Mark likes to say all, I think, most of the time, meaning we can always count on Jesus to heal us. But and now we have another instance of unclean spirits in crescendo, each time increasingly, both in their reaction and in their confession. And here their reaction is that they fall before him and cry out, "You are the Son of God." The first unclean spirit possessed man in chapter 1 says, "You are the Holy One of God." In chapter 5, Legion is going to see him from a distance and run and says, "You are the Son of God Most High." So this is a crescendo, an increase in how these demons with preternatural, unnatural ability to know things who know exactly who Jesus is, whereas no human being does until he dies on the cross and the centurion sees him. And then we have, of course, the calling of the uh, 12 up on a mountain, a place of encounter with God. He called to be with him those who he desired, and appointed 12, whom we also named apostles. Apostle, by the way, it would be the Septuagint Greek version of someone sent as a prophet, for example, in the Old Testament. So that the word apostle is like the New Testament equivalent of a sent emissary prophet. And by the way, they will also have exousia. It'll say a little bit later, or actually a little bit before. He gave him authority. He gave him exousia to cast out demons. So he's sharing and imparting this exousia that only God grants, as in Daniel, as we saw, has authority upon the earth to forgive sins in the healing of the paralytic in Mark, I think 2:11. And so Simon is always mentioned first with this change of name to Peter, which is a big rock, like maybe cliff. So he's always first, and Judas Iscariot is always last. What comes in between has some variants. Obviously, his close ones would be James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James, whom he gave the name Boanerges, sons of thunder. And then you have these other, and look how interesting this is. It says Simon the Zealot, which is really a translation of Simon the Cananean. Kana in Hebrew would be zeal, passion. With zeal have I zeal for the Lord. Elijah says using this word kana, or the God who, the idol who inspires passion in Ezekiel when he sees this basket with idols, etc. And the Lord is a Elkanah, a jealous, passionate, fiery God, who then becomes El Rahum in Deuteronomy 4. This is one of the things that Richard Elliott Friedman, one of my favorite Bible scholars who wrote the Bible, I recommend that book. I'm plugging all these Jewish Bible scholars who are incredible, but he talks about a change in Deuteronomy 4 from this El Kana, this fiery, destroying God, to El Rahum, the God of the mother's womb of compassion. And so we're going to have to stop there and continue then in Mark with chapter 3 when we go on to the relatives of Jesus and the not unrelated accusation that he's possessed, or he does this in the finger of Beelzebub. So we'll stop there and continue next time.